All right, guys. So we finally made it to The Last of Us episode 1 review. This is the first show I think in a long time that I've actually been excited to do a review video for you guys because I actually enjoy this show a lot. This first episode is completely fantastic in every way imaginable, and there are some issues that I have with it. Don't get me wrong, and I'm gonna go into that in this review. So don't forget to stick around. Give this a nice long view duration. This is going to be a long episode, guys, because it's almost an hour and a half this premiere. But stick around with me. Give me a long view duration. Help me fight the YouTube algorithm by doing so. And let's get into this review of The Last of Us, one of the best adaptations of a video game or of anything that had a source material in a very long time. Let's get into it. So the start of the series is actually very good. The reason why is because they give you an entirely new perspective over the context of the entire fungal virus, right? So they give you an entire new context, which is very interesting to check out, and it's a very well played out scene, and it's from the 1960s. Okay, so this is a long time before the initial outbreak in 2003 for this show, and eventually leading to the 2023 current day time of which The Last of Us, the TV show, takes place. But this one, I believe, happens in 1968, if I'm not mistaken, and they have a whole sitcom piece where they talk about the potential of a fungal virus compared to regular viruses and their chances of being a extreme epidemic or a pandemic or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to show you some clips about it. I can't show everything because obviously copyright issues, but I'll show you some clips to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. Check this clip out.
Can make us ill, but fungi can alter our very minds. There's a fungus that infects insects, gets inside an ant, for example, travels through its circulatory system to the ant's brain and then floods it with hallucinogens, thus bending the ant's mind to its will. Fungus starts.
See, stuff like this is what makes this show so good because it gives you that context. It gives you that backstory to understand exactly a little bit how this fungal virus is going to work. But let's continue listening.
To direct the ant's behavior, telling it where to go, what to do, like a puppeteer with a marionette. And it gets worse. The fungus needs food to live, so it begins to devour its host from within, replacing the ant's flesh with its own. But it
I love this. This is good stuff, and it kind of makes me a little sad that something like this wasn't included in the actual video game. But it's fine. This is why you have adaptations, because if you use a proper adaptation like this and you build upon it instead of disrespecting it, you can do great stuff like this. But let's continue.
doesn't let its victim die, no. It keeps its puppet alive by preventing decomposition. How? Where do we get penicillin from?
Fungus. Dr. Schoenheiss, you're in distress.
Fungal infection of this kind is real, but not in humans.
True fungi.
So one thing they do with this entire fungal explanation is that they try to turn it into a global warming thing, okay? Now that you can leave that up to you to decide how you want to feel about that. Obviously, that's more leaning towards politics and whatnot. You can decide how you feel about that. For me, I can sort of believe it, okay? I can kind of bend it a little bit and be like, all right, fine, whatever. I can believe that, all right, if the temperature of the planet overall has increased a few degrees, but to tell me that it only takes a couple degrees to make something like this possible, that's when it leads me to believe, okay, maybe that's not so super believable. But besides the point, it definitely hits the points of political or ideology speak at this point in time when they start talking about global warming.
Survive if its host's internal temperature is over 94 degrees. And currently there are no reasons for fungi to evolve to be able to withstand higher temperatures. But what if that were to change? What if, for instance, the world were to get slightly warmer?
So you guys get the point. So this entire sitcom takes us into the beginning episode, and everybody gets super quiet when he starts talking about global warming because they want you to feel like it's a super serious thing, right? So we're going to fast forward. So now we're in 2003. This is when it all takes place, the initial outbreak. I'm not gonna play this, but they do give you a little more backstory with Joel and Sarah. Now, obviously, you have the super lazy race swapped Sarah, and you have Pedro Pascal playing Joel. Now, they did seemingly whiten Pedro Pascal's skin color almost, it seems like. I'm not really sure if that's a thing. It seems like it is. I could be wrong because I've seen him in other pictures where he looks a bit darker, but I'm not really sure. He definitely gives you the vibe of Joel for sure. He gives you the overall mannerisms of Joel, the way Joel speaks, and I can appreciate that and I enjoy it. He definitely plays Joel very well. Sarah, on the other hand, just gives you a race swap Sarah. I mean, she obviously does the whole emotional connection thing very well. I think she acts very well, so good on her. But this whole thing is obviously very lazy. And the funny thing is, they end up staying true to the source material, right? So you know exactly what's going to happen to Sarah just 20 minutes into the first episode. So they did this whole diversity race swap thing, and they did it all just to end her anyway. It's kind of crazy, but let's keep going. So They give you a little more backstory where they start talking about the neighbor who apparently has an elderly mother who is very sick, and you think it's a regular sickness up to a certain point where you realize it's not quite so regular. Then you get a little more backstory on Sarah when she's in school, and she notices one thing, and I think this is what I noticed as well. But in this actual scene, she's thinking of and she just notices something. This dude is twitching. You see that? Let's go back really quick. Let's go back. If you notice, the student's hand is twitching like crazy. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. She feels like something is off. She looks at the hand and then look, completely twitching nonstop. So that's one of the first, and obviously it's followed by ominous music. So that's one of your first signs that something's not quite right. And you get a lot of different tidbits of something not being quite right over the entire episode. One also thing that happens is that when she is actually coming home from the bus, she doesn't go home. She goes to the watch shop, and that gives you a little more context into how she managed to get the watch fixed that she ends up giving to Joel before all the chaos happens for his birthday. So that's a nice little scene. I don't think the scene added anything, though. I don't think we really needed to see how she got the watch fixed. I don't really think that was super important, to be honest with you, but they added that anyway. Then she ends up going to the neighbor's house, and she ends up going into the house and seeing the grandma. Now, the grandma, she doesn't quite see the grandma do this, but the grandma, who is seemingly regular sick, has this episode of something not being quite right, and we're going to check this out.
Want to give me a hand?
Be right there.
So if you look at Graham, she starts doing a little weird stuff. Very weird. Twitching. Obviously, seemingly becoming infected, it looks like. Very crazy.
Hey, Mrs. Adler? Could I
So
borrow...
something clearly is not right, okay? And that's what I love. I love that they give you a very, I would say the intro for this TV show is a lot more suspenseful than the actual game was. Even though the game did it fantastic, and I feel like overall, from an overarching standpoint, the game definitely did it better. But for this TV show, this whole like premise, this whole like suspense, it's good. Like for a TV show, it's very, very good, and it gets you interested. And of course, one of the things that are pretty much every zombie TV show has is the animals knowing something's up. When the dog is essentially staring at grandma, knowing that something is very wrong with grandma. I like that little scene, and once again, it shows you that something is just not quite right. Sarah ends up seeing planes flying over the houses, assuming military planes flying over the houses, that something is just not quite right. And that's the whole premise of this prologue. It's supposed to tell you that something's not quite right. And as someone who's played the games, you should basically know that something is not quite right. They even dress Sarah in similar clothing to the gaming Sarah, the pink shirt and whatnot. They didn't give her the long sleeves, but they gave her the pink shirt and put her hair up in a bun. So they do try to give homage to it. Now, this is the scene where she ends up giving Joel the watch. Now, this is obviously a big scene in the game because it's supposed to show the connection between Sarah and Joel that is unfortunately short-lived for obvious reasons. So he ends up putting Sarah to bed, and he ends up having to leave because Tommy ends up getting locked up in prison. So he has to leave Sarah. Sarah goes to bed, and when she goes to bed, a couple hours later, it's 2:16 in the morning, and things are starting to hit the fan. So she's starting to hear stuff outside. Chaos is ensuing, and we're back to basically what happens in the video game. Now, the crazy thing is, this entire scene, almost, once you get to the truck, is nearly a side-by-side comparison shot of the video game. I did a video on this previously before releasing this video. If you guys missed it, go check it out. But it's literally a side-by-side shot. It's actually very, very impressive. But the one thing is, she ends up going to Miss Adler's house, and when she goes to Miss Adler's house, she sees the grandma doing something that's a little bit strange. So this is the problem here, okay? So they changed this. They changed the means of transmission between the infected. And that's one of my issues with the story for the TV show right now. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if it's a good thing, and I don't know if it's a bad thing. The reason why is because if you change something that prominent as the means of transmission for your virus, that I feel like can leave open loopholes later down the road in the story that you have to work your way through that you normally wouldn't have if you would have just kept it true to the source material. So the way she's transmitting the disease is that it's like these little tendrils come out of her mouth, right? This is, you see these little tendrils. This is how it's like little fungus tendrils that come out, and then when she bites the next person, it spreads the disease, right? So I feel like they made this change because at the end of the day, they wanted this to be a zombie show, right? And they know a lot of people who are watching this show are not necessarily going to have the backstory of the video games to follow. So they needed something to connect people with typical zombie tropes, right? So they made the transmission from a bite versus spores because it would be easier for people to understand and follow along with, in my opinion. That's why they changed it. I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but that's how I feel is the reason why they changed it. And like I said, I don't know if it's necessarily a good change. I really don't think it is. I think it's gonna not end up working out in their favor later down the road, but I could be wrong. I was wrong about this show in the beginning, and I definitely could be wrong again. But once again, I don't really think it's gonna work out. So Joel ends up showing up with the truck, and this is where the typical scene happens with Joel, Tommy, and Sarah when they get into the truck and they're trying to escape. This is a literal side by side shot. It is so unbelievably impressive that they did
Jimmy's
this,
place.
like almost for dialogue, camera shot for camera shot. Everything is from Sarah's POV from the back of the truck, which is exactly how the game was. It's awesome. I mean, it really is. Like they
The
did a
others are
great
taking
job.
into the city.
They did a really great job with this, and they need to do stuff like this going down in future because this is how you're going to hook the fans. This is how you're going to get the fans to watch your stuff because this proves and this shows that you actually cared about the source material enough to do something like a side-by-side shot, to do a literal like one-on-one side-by-side shot. That takes a lot of acknowledging the source material in order to do. So I'm very happy with this, and I think they did a great job with it. Now, obviously, you guys know what happens from here, right? So the whole chaos ensues. They try to escape. They end up getting trapped into the city, and then a plane ends up landing and exploding behind the truck, thus causing them to basically flip over, as expected. So very typical stuff. Now, here's another thing, too. So we're going to fast forward to the scene everybody wants to talk about, right? So with this particular scene, it is very faithful. It's very true, okay? They mention almost dialogue for dialogue the exact things you see in the game. One thing I noticed they left out in the TV show, though, is how the guard, right? The guard acknowledges when he's talking to his commanding officer, he acknowledges and he says, "But, sir, there's a little girl." In the TV show, they don't say that. They just say, "Sir, yes, sir. Okay, copy, no problem." They don't want to mention the fact that it's a little girl and that this person is murdering a little girl. They don't really seem to want to mention it, even though they are doing it on screen. They don't say it. In the video game, they mentions like, "Sir, there's a little girl." And that line, in my opinion, is huge because that line shows just how vile they are, like how unbelievably just insane it is that someone acknowledged that there was a little girl and they still decided to shoot and kill anyway. So taking out that line for me was a little bit of a miss. They definitely should have put that line in there. But overall, the entire meaning of the scene plays out the exact way that you expect it to. Sarah and Joelle end up getting shot, with Sarah being the brunt of the shot, and she unfortunately doesn't make it. Once again, it's a side-by-side shot of the game. Very good. Very, very good.
I'm sorry.
Please don't.
All right, so I'm not going to show the gunshot, obviously, because YouTube will demonetize the hell out of me. But yes, I'm surprised and shocked. And when I was watching this show, my entire viewpoint and opinion of this show was going to be based off of whether or not they actually killed off the race-swapped Sarah. If they killed off the race-swapped Sarah the way they were supposed to, then I already knew this show was going to follow the source material for the most part. And they did. They did kill off the race-swapped Sarah, shockingly, in the exact manner. The real Sarah ended up dying, and it was gruesome stuff. You still get goosebumps at the end of the day, but it does show you exactly what you should see. So I think they did a great job with this. Now, fast forward 20 years, obviously you get this whole scene, show you Tess and Joelle is in charge of doing certain kinds of work within the city that has to allow him to get paid some way, somehow, or rationed some way, somehow, and it seems like they're just burning bodies of infected people or people who were killed. And then she ends up saying that there's a kid in there, she can't do it, so he ends up doing it pretty much very easily and ends up throwing the body into the fire, and yeah. That's basically it. He gets his money for the job, and you come to find out that he's some sort of a smuggler, some sort of I wouldn't really call him a dealer, even though he is giving him some sort of drugs, it seems like. But he is a smuggler, okay? He's a drug dealer at its lowest, and he's dealing to the guards in order to get certain information as well as supplies that he can utilize to try to get out of there, because that's his main goal. His main goal is to try to escape because the entire place is basically taken over by a totalitarian military organization that basically runs the show, with the rebel organization Fireflies, that you guys I'm sure are very well aware of, obviously fighting their cause. Now, Tess is locked up because Tess is getting completely beat up right now and had the car battery stolen that she was going to use with Joelle to try to escape the city. And then from here, we see our first shot of Ellie. So Ellie, in my opinion, is casted pretty well. Definitely more on the boyish looking side, I would say, of things, but overall, Ellie is casted pretty well. And on top of that, too, she definitely captures the attitude and spunk of Ellie, in my opinion, too, because Ellie obviously has a lot of spunk, a lot of attitude. She grew up in this post apocalyptic world, so obviously she doesn't have all the patience. And she's just basically a dick. And that's essentially how she is. But she is locked up for reasons unknown at this point in time. And then Joelle ends up trying to go to this person who's in charge of a radio, or one of the only radios I assume that's working within the complex. And he's trying to get in touch with Tommy, his brother, who he believes is still alive. And he asks this person, is Tommy still alive? And he says yes.
It hasn't been that long. It's been 3 weeks. It's never taken him more than a day to respond. I'm sure he's okay.
So he tries to convince Joelle that he's okay. And then moving forward, we have a scene of Joelle and Tess, which basically confirms their relationship from the video game and makes it a little more blatant in this show. Because obviously, post-apocalyptic world, you need some form of companionship, I'm sure. But then she tells him that the car battery ended up getting stolen and he ended up getting screwed. So obviously, out of frustration, he wants to go beat the guy up and try to get it back. So on their mission to go get it back, they end up panning the camera and going to the Firefly. So this is where we get introduced to Marlene from the game. Marlene obviously has the goal of trying to escort Ellie out of the situation within the actual town, because Ellie is the cure to everything, or like that's at least what they think. And this person didn't know that until she ended up telling this person. And then going forward, Marlene ends up talking to Ellie for the first time and explaining that she was the reason why that Ellie was put into military camp, and that Ellie has a bigger purpose for everybody.
Which terrorist dumped me with Fedra?
Because it's where you'd be safest, and you were safe there until you decided to sneak out. A terrorist? Was Riley a terrorist?
Why won't you let me go?
Because you have a greater purpose than any of us could have ever imagined.
So that's what she kind of lets on to Ellie, that she's special in some way, shape, or form, which she still has no idea, but she kind of has an idea based off the fact that she was bitten 3 weeks prior and has not turned when most people turn within a day or two from being bitten. So Joelle and Tess end up going to get Ray some hell, and then when they do, they end up realizing that by the time they get there, everybody has already been killed, which is obviously convenient. And they were killed by the Fireflies. So when they meet there, they check out and they see Marlene. Marlene knows Joelle. Marlene obviously has been stabbed. Well, almost gets stabbed by Ellie. He gets completely mollywopped, which is great. Love to see it. And then when you go forward, Marlene ends up convincing Joelle to take her, and she will double what he is owed, or nearly triple at this point, if he promises to get her there safely. Joelle has no idea whether to do it or not, and Tess ends up asking and questioning, which obviously they agree to do it if they promise not to screw them over and give them what they want before they hand over Ellie. So Ellie reluctantly agrees to go, and then when they decide to go, they spend 1 day together where she kind of deciphers what the hidden meanings in the radios mean, which is exactly what Joelle's been listening to on the radio this entire time, because the music dictates whether something's wrong or right or just normal at that point, and she figures it out, and then they go for the escape. But when they go for the escape, they end up getting caught by the same guard that he deals with, and he told him to stay away and not try to escape, and obviously Joelle tries to escape with Ellie, and that leads to an altercation where Joelle ends up having a flashback of Sarah being gunned down by someone, and he just ends up completely losing it and beats the hell out of this guy. So obviously it's pretty ugly, but that's to be expected in The Last of Us, right? So he ends up beating the hell out of that guy, and then Tess figures out that she's infected because she looks at the monitor that the guard was using, and it came back as infected, shockingly. And then at the end of it all, the music starts playing, and I believe it starts playing the music that means that something is wrong, and then it pans out and shows you 2 completely destroyed towers in a city that's completely destroyed. Obviously, everything is destroyed. It's trying to give you this idea of just how serious everything has become, and it pans out exactly how the game did, man. I'm telling you, this show is fantastic. It really is. I'm not doing it justice with this review, honestly, and I'm trying to just break it down little by little, so those of you who may not be able to watch the show can understand what happens. But it just truly is a fantastic adaptation of a video game, and it deserves all the credit in the world that it's getting right now. And if they continue to do what they're doing as they did in the first episode with future episodes, I promise you this is going to be a major hit, because it already is. It has a 96% audience score, a 99% critic score, which I still think is a little sus, but it has a 96% audience score. It is fantastic, and it's going to continue to do so as long as they stay true to the source material like they're doing now. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you did enjoy, and if you did, consider leaving me a subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Don't forget to like the video, comment, and let me know what you thought, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Hypnotic out.